Hello, guys. Can you hear me? Let me make sure that my mic is okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Ah. Yes, you are hearing me, and I am hearing you. All three of you. Was there something on the weather I wasn't aware of today?
So, so I think the portiers have interim, I think tomorrow.
Oh boy. Oh no. What shall happen to their old computing?
So that's why. Oh boy. Like pulling teeth.
Why, there have been other things?
No, sir, just to get people to do stuff, you know.
Well, let's see. According to our schedule, we do have what do we have coming up? We have assignment 1 kind of representation, because remember that some persons hadn't presented yet. That is on Wednesday though, right?
Oh, okay.
All right.
I had uploaded it to the site. Since not everybody would present again, right?
No man, not everybody. Just those who did not present on the time. And then those who already presented supposed to hand in on Wednesday, so we can mark that and get that out of the way.
Oh, okay. I mean, I just uploaded it to the site, so. When you say handy, we have to print it?
No, there's no hand in, but there is a hand in for the field notes today though. Today is 14th. Yeah man. The field notes, which is the notes that you captured on the web, on the site visit. Right. Because remember, you know, you're going to need the field notes. You're going to need the field notes in order to create the BIM model, right? Well, the whole group will need their respective field notes. So the last class, we were kind of going through some guidance for setting up BIM. And well, the good news is that what I did, I prepared a tight, I call it a tight tutorial that I believe should be able to get you guys through it, right? So today, what should have happened today is that the BIM manager should have had their cloud folders set up, and then we now would go into doing the cloud collaboration. which we're still going to do, nevertheless. We're still going to do that, and we will go through that now so that you guys can have this as a recording so that you guys can look at for your BIM project. All right, so we're still going to go through that. I wonder if I'm going to see any field note documents at Anya tomorrow. I wonder indeed. But we shall see. We shall see. So interim is tomorrow. So when is final, Crit? Are you guys not sure? Because you guys are not in the 4th year?
I guess somewhere on December 5th.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I think about Wednesday we should release the final handout, which is the final assessment, and that handout would be you guys submitting a sample of your studio work in which you have used your mimic technique to produce. So that's just going to be a simple upload. So we'll release that about Wednesday. But my concern now is the groups. I mean, in order for you guys to create your BIM model, you will need the field notes, definitely. Because the field notes has the plans to what you're going to be drawing. So that is the first step. Then the second step is to actually set up the BIM platform, which I know that can be tricky. That's why I prepared some content specifically to assist us in that task. So we're going to dive right into that so that we can so if anybody has any questions, you can ask. And I guess for those who are unable to come, they can always catch the class recording. All right. Let's see. Are you guys seeing the screen okay?
Yes, sir.
And are you guys hearing okay?
Could you turn off the music in the background, sir?
Oh. All right. All right. So what we're going to be looking on is well, firstly, just a quick overview of what we did last week. Not in any great detail, just so to make sure that we got it. And then we are going to be looking at now moving forward with setting with how do we now collaborate with each other once we have all been set up on the BIM network. Oh, by the way, guys, oh wait, not getting any audio. You guys aren't getting any audio, right? I mean,
we're hearing,
you're hearing
we're
me,
hearing,
but you're not hearing the pre-recording.
no.
Exactly. I figured. Oops.
But sir, isn't it a matter of having the drawing file saved in the OneDrive as a collaborative project, and then each computer access it accordingly?
Well, yes, that's in the nutshell version, yeah. But it you know, as we're discussing, it has to be via a particular route, right? So yeah, that's the idea. It needs to be in the OneDrive for us to access it. But how do you access it? You need to access it through a virtual drive, and there are some little nuances. So we're going to go into now, okay, it's in the OneDrive now. How do we work together? So we were trying to set up a kind of a live demo, but that was proving a little tricky. So what we have here is it is a live demo, but it is more, there we go. It is more of a one-man band simulated experience. But nevertheless, this is a simulation with three groups. With a group consisting of 3 people. So it would be the same kind of process, right? Hello and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be looking on how we can set up work sharing for Revit, and this will essentially help us to work collaboratively in Revit. Now there are 2 ways that we can work collaboratively, and if we take a look here, we can see that we can either work locally on the network, which is totally free, or we can work in the cloud using BIM 360, now Collaborate 360, and that is a subscription service. Now we're going to be looking at how we can set this up with a hybrid method, and we're going to be doing that with OneDrive, which is a free service that's offered. It comes natively on Windows computers, and the way that we're going to do this is by allowing our computers to communicate through a virtual drive software, and that virtual drive is going to connect to OneDrive, and in turn that OneDrive will be synchronized to another user's virtual drive. So essentially that gives the illusion to Revit that we're on the same network. So let's take a quick look at how we can set that up. Now what you're seeing here is 3 computers that we are going to be using to set this up, and these 3 computers are simulating computers in 3 geographic locations, right? So they are not on the same network but located pretty much anywhere in the world, and we're going to be representing these computers with this name: desktop, laptop, and Apple. And these names are just here to kind of just allow us to identify each computer separately. Now these 3 computers here are 3 full-on Windows computers. So here we have the desktop computer, here we have the laptop computer, and over here we have the Apple computer. Now, point to note, even though it's called Apple computer, it is really a copy of Windows, and that is actually running on an Apple device using the Parallels software. But these names are just given to these computers to help us to identify what computer is what. Now, the main master computer that we're going to be using to do all of this work is going to be the desktop computer, which is this computer here, which is a Windows computer. Now, in order to get this set up, all three computers needs to have a OneDrive account, otherwise a Microsoft account. They also need to have OneDrive desktop client installed. Now this comes pre-installed in most Windows computers, but in case you don't have it installed, you can know that it's installed because, for example, if I look here on my laptop computer, you can see that on the start button here, we see that OneDrive is running here. And on the Apple computer, if we take a look over here and we take a look here, we can see that OneDrive is also running on the Apple computer here. Now, if I click and go into settings, you can see here that this is running a OneDrive Personal. This is the free OneDrive account from Windows, and this is actually using my email address here. Then if we look on the laptop computer and we take a look here, we can see that this is using another email address here. And then of course, if we look on the desktop computer here, we can also see that this is also has a OneDrive that is also installed here. So at the end of the day, all three of these computers have OneDrive desktop client installed, and they're all signed in using a OneDrive free account where we have 5 gigs free. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be needing to do is we need to create a folder and share it with my other team members here. So in this case, I am going to be creating the folder with the desktop computer, and then I'm going to share this folder with the laptop computer and also share this folder with the Apple computer. So that is going to be the theory behind how we're going to do this. All right, so what I'm going to do is on the desktop computer, I'm going to open the OneDrive folder using the desktop client. So I can either click on the little cloud here and click open folder, or I can double click on the little cloud folder here. And what I'm seeing here is my OneDrive folder that's represented on my computer. Now on OneDrive, you will see these little icons here, and what these icons are saying is that when you see the green tick, that would mean that this file is available offline, and when you see the cloud here, that means that this file is really stored online, and you have to be connected to the internet to access this file. And when you see this little circle here, this is saying that this file is currently undergoing synchronization with the cloud. So those are the icons that you should look out for. Now in this case, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a new project, and I'm going to right click and go to new folder, and I'm going to create a folder called BIM project in this case. Now, when I create this folder on my computer here, because I am in the OneDrive client, this folder is actually being synchronized to the cloud, and I can actually test that by right clicking here, and I can go to view my OneDrive online, and what that will do is open up my OneDrive online, and you can see here that when I look online, I'm seeing that there is a folder called BIM project, and even though I created it on my computer, it is synchronized with my OneDrive folder online, right? So basically we can close this and just operate totally from our computer, and it will synchronize everything online. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to share this folder, this BIM project folder here, with the laptop, and I also want to share it with the Apple as well, right? So in order to do that, what I need to do is to right click, and then I'm going to choose the OneDrive folder here, and I'm going to go to share. Now when I go to share, I need to put in I could either share this by putting in the email addresses of the people that I want to share with, or I could just copy this link and send it directly to them. In this case, we're going to use the email process. So I'm going to send a link to the email addresses of the laptop and the Apple users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type the email address of the laptop user, and that email address will be creativemastersjm@hotmail.com. Now, point to note, you can only use Hotmail or Outlook.com addresses for this process to work, right? So if you don't have an Hotmail or a Outlook email, you will need to sign up for a free account. So the next one we want to send this to is to brianwilliamsjm@hotmail.com. Now, in this case, the Creative Masters email is linked to the laptop, and the Brian Williams JM email is linked to the Apple, right? So the laptop is using a Hotmail address, which is Creative Masters, and the Apple is using a Hotmail address, which is Brian Williams JM, right? So those are those users. Now I am going to click send, and this will send this link. Now when I am the laptop user, what I'm going to do here is in order to now receive this invitation to this folder, I need to go to my OneDrive online. So I will go here to the OneDrive client, and I'll go to view online. Now once I do that, I need to go over to shared, and when I go to shared, you will notice that I see the BIM underscore project, which was shared with me from the main computer, and you can actually see that folder here. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the Apple computer, where I need to also go to my OneDrive folder here. And when I go to my OneDrive folder here, I will go to View Online. And then when I go to View Online, I'm going to go to Shared. Now what you notice is that you will see, in this case, you will see the BIM project folder also shared here. So right now we can see on both computers where we have the BIM project on the laptop user and also on the Apple user here. And of course these two folders were shared from the PC user, from the desktop user rather, to both of these users here. Now of course there, if you don't see the BIM project folder pop up under shared, then you could hit refresh a few times, or ultimately you could just send the link option instead of the email option. But the truth is that once you share the folder, it should show up under shared in a couple seconds. All right, great. So now all three computers has this folder shared. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to add this folder to each of the user's OneDrive folder. Now, to remember, if you remember, the BIM project folder is native to the desktop user, right? Because that's the person that made the folder. However, the laptop user and the Apple user, those folders are under shared, but we really want them to be added to the OneDrive for those users. So what that means is that on these computers we need to choose this option here, which says add shortcut to my files, and we need to do that same thing for the Apple user, where we say add files to my drive. Now all members that want to have this project in their OneDrive needs to click this option. This option is a critical step. So I'm going to choose to add to my files here, and it's going to give me an indication that this was added to my files. And I'm going to do the same thing on the Apple user, where I'm going to choose add to my files, and there we go. Now once you have shared the folder, in this case it's the BIM project folder, you will notice that you may see some notifications pop up when you share via email. Now you can access this from the notification. So for example, if I look in my laptop here, you will see that there is actually a notification that says, hey, I shared a folder called BIM_project. Now you could click the notifications, and that will also take you to the location here. It will bring up your OneDrive folder, and it will carry you straight to that shared folder, which is what you see here, where it takes you to the folder. Now let's try a different method on the Apple computer. What I could do is I could go here and say view my OneDrive folder online. Then when I view that folder online, I would head over to shared folder, and there it is. It's also right here. So whichever method you choose to accept the invite, whether it's through a notification or whether you choose to go to your OneDrive folder under shared, they will be there. So I'm going to go to shared here, and there is that BIM project folder. So on both computers, you can see where I have that BIM project folder there. Now the next important step is that we need to now add this BIM project folder to each user's OneDrive folder. And to do that, we're going to choose this option here which says okay, are you guys with me so far?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this part was a little
Yes,
bit of a refresher of what we should know already, and we're going to jump right into the new part. But I kind of had the feeling that some of us wasn't really clear on how we need to set up this OneDrive and our virtual drive folder. So that's why we're just doing a quick recap and then we continue. I can choose open folder, and I'll do the same thing for the Apple, and I go to open folder. And what you will notice is that in my OneDrive files, I now see that I have a folder called BIM project, and the same for my Apple laptop here, I now have a file called BIM project. Now essentially what this is telling me is that all these are now synchronized, where for each computer I have a folder called BIM project on all these computers, and anything I do to one folder, so for example if I create a new file in one of these folders, then all three persons will see it. But keep in mind that it originally belongs to this piece, the desktop user. So whenever files are created, it is the desktop user that those that will OneDrive space will be used, right? Because that is the original owner of that folder. Okay, great. So this now means that we are fully synchronized with our OneDrive folder, and the next step will be to install the virtual drive application that we are going to use to allow us to collaboratively use Revit with all of the users here. Okay, great. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to get the virtual drive software that will help us to synchronize these online folders and will allow us to use the collaborative features on Revit. Now the software we're going to use is a free software, so we're going to open up our browser and we are going to search for we're going to go to the website portablefreesoftware.com, and this is a cool website that has a lot of free portable software. Portable meaning you don't need to install it, you just need to run it. And we're going to search for VSUBST, that's VSUB ST, and this is what that software looks like. And we're going to click download, and we're going to just choose here, and we're going to say download now, and And then we're going to download from here, and we're going to just wait a little bit for our download to begin. And there we go, and we should have it downloaded here. Now once it is downloaded in the folder, it would be a good idea to now share this program with all the members of the team, because you will be needing this this application for each member. So if I look here in my downloads folder, I see where I have the file here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in this folder here, and that is that file there. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to put it in the BIM project folder, because remember, this folder is shared with all users. So I'm going to say new folder, and I'm just going to call this one software, and I'm going to place that vsubst software in this folder here. Let's go paste. Okay, so now that I have placed it there, now my other team members will be able to access this program. So for example, on my laptop computer user, I will go to BIM project, and I will see that I also have a software folder here, and you may not see it pop up immediately, but if you wait a little while, you will see it pop up there. Now I'm going to do the same thing for my Apple user here, and there we go. So now all three of us have this program because we have placed it in the shared program. So we're going to run this on all computers. Right, so all three users needs to run this, and sometimes you will get a message saying that, you know, do you want to it's not verified, so you can choose run. This is a fully safe piece of software, so you don't need to worry about it. So now what this is doing is this is going to allow us to choose a letter that we want to create for this virtual drive. Now all this is really doing is, instead of us going to a OneDrive folder, we would now go to a drive letter that is linked to our OneDrive folder, and this is exactly what we need in order for Revit collaboration to work properly. So we are going to decide on a letter that we're going to use for all of our drives here. So in this case, I am going to use the drive W, and if I in order for us to collaborate effectively, all three users in this case must select drive W for their virtual drive that will be created. Now in the case of the Mac, notice that the Mac user does not have drive W available. So in this case, I would say, hey guys, I don't have the letter W free, so let's try a different letter. So how about Q? So for the other users, we say, okay, then let's see if all of us have Q available. Let's see here, and we do. So we have now made a decision that we are going to use drive Q, which is going to be our virtual drive that represents our OneDrive folder. So we're going to choose add, and here's the important part. On each computer, we need to browse to the OneDrive folder and choose the BIM project as our virtual drive source. Alright, so all users need to do this, so I'm going to choose OK, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other users, where I'm going to choose add. I'm going to go select, and I'm going to say, hey, I want the BIM project folder to be my source folder for this virtual drive, And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And we're going to choose the bin folder there. Now, great. Now this is all done, we can exit the program. And now what you will notice is that when we go to our PC, on all computers, you will notice that all of these computers have a drive queue, right? So we can see on the desktop computer we have a drive queue here. On the laptop computer we have a drive queue, and on the Apple computer we also have a drive queue, right? And this drive queue is linking to the same file that is shared through OneDrive. So now we are truly in sync, and once we have this set up, we can now move to working on our project collaboratively in Revit. Okay, now that we have this set up, we now have a virtual drive, and in our case our virtual drive is going to be drive Q. This virtual drive is looking for its files in your OneDrive. Now this same OneDrive is shared to your group members, and that group member also has a virtual drive that is Q, and it's also looking for those files in the same OneDrive that's linked together in the cloud. And this is how everything will work smoothly, because Revit will be looking for the central file in Q on users 2 PC, and user 1 PC, Revit will also be looking for the central file, which will also be in a drive Q. So Revit is going to think that, hey, the same drive queue that is on user 2 must be the same drive queue that is on user 1, and it will just operate as if that is the case. So this is how this whole hybrid method works. Now there is one small caveat that you should know about, and this virtual drive that is installed, it's a portable application, and when the portable application is run, it creates the drive queue, right? However, in this case it's drive queue, but it could be any letter, right? However, when you restart your computer or log out or log in, well, that virtual drive is no longer going to be there because it's not running, right? Because it's a portable app, so you have to run it every single time you turn on your computer, unless after you have already set up the virtual drive. And if I go back into the software folder, for those of you who want to make a more permanent virtual letter, right? So remember, we created a drive queue, but when you restart, drive queue will be gone, and you have to load it up all again in the virtual drive. Now, if you want to have the virtual drive run automatically, where it will keep that virtual drive when you restart, well, there's one more step that you'll have to do. And if I go back to my software folder here, that's the virtual drive that I received. Now, in order to run this, you're going to have to copy this and paste it somewhere on your computer. It could be anywhere on your desktop, but it can't be in the virtual drive to run the virtual drive. You get me? That's not going to work. So in this case, I'm going to paste the virtual drive application on my desktop here. So I'm going to paste it right there, and this can be anywhere. Could be near my documents, in your downloads. It can't be a zip format, so the file needs to be the original exe file. So I'm going to right click this and say run as administrator. And then I'm going to say yes. And once I run that as an administrator, I'm going to go back and I'm going to click on Drive Q. And I'm going to add it yet again. Now I'm doing this again as the under the administrator account, and I'm going to add back the BIM project there. Now the additional step we're going to do is where we're going to click persistent, and what persistent does is that it will let the virtual drive be persistent, meaning it will always be there when you restart the computer. So I'm going to choose OK, and that's it. And see, it will, if I don't want it to be persistent anymore, I can just click on it and choose remove, but I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to go to exit. And now when you restart your computer, the virtual drive will remain, and you don't have to keep running the virtual drive application every time you want to collaborate. Now before we actually start to execute our plan, we need to just understand a little bit about how work sharing works in Revit. Now, so work sharing is a design method that allows multiple users to access the same model all simultaneously, right? And the idea in how it works is that, well, the point is that each Revit user will attempt to access one single Revit file. Now, in order to do that, we need to enable work sets in Revit, which is the collaboration feature. And what work sets will do is kind of direct us to divide the model into different work sets. Revit calls them work sets. Essentially, it's like cutting the cake into little slices so that every user can access a slice of the model. Now, when we enable work sets, it's just going to create kind of just one big slice and say, hey, you know, this is the model. It's one big slice, and it's up to the, in this case, the BIM coordinator to slice up that model into pieces that all of the other users can access. Now, when this model is created, it's going to create what's called a central file, and then both users are going to attempt to open this this central file. Now, whenever a user tries to open a central file, what essentially happens is that the central file will automatically create a local version of itself, kind of just duplicating itself. And once it's duplicated, then the user really accesses that duplicated file. So in a way, this central file kind of remains, you know, away from the access of all users, and users don't really interact directly with this central file, but instead they interact with this kind of a middleman here, and that middleman then interacts with the central file, right? So that is essentially what happens in this case. And when a user really accesses the central file, well, central just creates a file and say, hey user, use this file, and when you have made changes, then you can update the central file. And that's really the concept behind how the central file works. Now, when you are working collaboratively in Revit, there are really two ways to do this. There is the assigned work mode, and in this mode, the Revit model is assigned to, is broken down into chunks, and each chunk is assigned to a particular user, right? So everyone is assigned a part of the model to work on. Now, the other way to work is called the unassigned free access mode, right? And in this mode, the project is really one big model, and each chunk, every element in the model is not assigned. So it's kind of a first come, first serve, where I can jump in the model and I can say, hey, I'm going to grab this and work on it. And another person might jump in the model, and if they try to grab the same thing that I grabbed, it's going to say, no, well, I already grabbed that, so that's locked. And then when I'm finished, using this, then the other person can access it. But there's no way to really know who is assigned for what. So, for example, this mode is primarily used, the unassigned mode, for existing models. So, for example, I don't know if you guys remember, but in BIM last year, it was the kind of free access method that we used. Anybody remember that?
Yes, sir.
So it was kind of where your groups just chose a model that's going to be for the group, and then all of you just access that model, whenever and however you want, right? And we didn't use work sets to say, okay, you are responsible for that, you're responsible for that. It was just a kind of a free access, and you just come in the model, access what you want, and save any changes that you made. All right, so that's what we used last year. And this year we're going to now look on how we can use it in the other way, which is the assigned work. For example, if you are working on a project and maybe the project, yeah.
What you're saying is, when you so say for example, you're going to assign plumbing work to a person. That person would select the work set and then start drawing plumbing items. That
Right.
will turn off that plumbing area. Everything within that, everything that was created on that layer would be turned off. Rather than the other method where the model would have been created already, and you're now creating work sets, they would have already had access to the entire model.
Something like that, because in both methods you have access to the entire model. It's just that in the assigned work method, you basically create these layers and say, okay, John, you are for layer 1. Henry, you are for layer 2. Harry, you are for layer 3. But the unassigned mode, you just jump in the model and edit whatever you want. They're not on like layers, right? You just edit whatever you want. The trick is that if two persons try to edit the same thing, then the first one to have actually touched the object is the one that will have that object locked. So, right. So
that I checked out the work sets with my team, and basically, one person is doing just annotation, right? And then I'm working on the model. So I'm making changes to the model itself while they're doing the annotation, though I know that the area that I'm modifying, they're not necessarily working on that area.
Right. And we're going to look on a little example a little further on. But, we're going to look on the assigned work mode first, which is where you give everybody work sets, right? So, each of them have their own like quirks and advantages. In some cases, it don't make sense. You make work sets for everybody, even though Revit recommends it. And in other cases, you have to do it. So, but we're going to look on the assigned work sets now.
Okay.
Has already existed, and you need some help to get the project done. You call in a couple of your friends to say, hey, let's get this project done. Well, the project wasn't divided into like segments. So essentially what happens is that somebody will just jump onto the project and say, hey, I'm going to grab this here. Another person might jump and say, hey, I'm going to grab this here. And another person might come on and say, I'm going to grab this, but oh, wait, you're already grabbing that, so I'm just going to grab this one instead, right? And you just kind of grab and start to work. And when you finish using, another person can get that part of the model to work on. Now, in the case when you have a new project where it's just a blank slate and you're about to start drawing, it's not recommended for you to have the kind of free access mode, because, for example, this model doesn't exist. So if one person starts to draw this element here, and another person, just say, hey, I'm going to draw the roof, it's going to be much more disorganized because the model doesn't exist already. So it's going to be hard for you to even position yourself in the model to draw each of the parts of the model that you're responsible for, right? So whenever you have a new project that's going from scratch, it's usually recommended that you work in work sets. As a matter of fact, Revit recommends that you always work in work sets. Even if it's for an existing project, somebody should coordinate the team to say, hey, okay, I'm going to split this project up into, first floor, second floor, third floor goes to group A, B, and C. And that's the way that Revit recommends it. But, it depends on your organization and your group or how you're working. But what I've noticed is that most people who are working on a project where they're not necessarily members of that team, they're just kind of jumped on to help. They normally work in the free access mode where they can quickly jump in and jump out, versus the assigned work mode where one person is always responsible for one element no matter what. So nobody else, even if they're not using that element, nobody else should access this element because only one person is assigned to it. So, that's a more rigid approach, but that approach is great for when you are especially creating new stuff where it's critical that you kind of follow through with what you're doing, and have nobody else intervene. They can intervene in the project on a different aspect that's assigned to them. So those are the two ways that you can work collaboratively in Revit.
Sure.
Yes.
I think that one, it would mean that like the engineer would be working on the project, and that any decision that the engineer takes has to be from him. In comparison to where I'm designing and then I have another person on the design team that's making decisions. I, as the architectural designer, could not make decisions as it relates to the engineer. So the engineer would have to lock his layout.
True. That's a good point. But also remember that I call it the Wild West mode, where you just kind of jump in and edit what you want. I mean, once you're involving another industry, the free mode is just not recommended. So whether it was the engineer that have elements of the drawing that should not be edited, or it is the architect that have elements of the model that should not be edited, once you're working outside of your office, you're going to want to lock those elements most definitely using work sets. The free access mode is kind of like maybe your principal or your supervisor gave you something to work on, and then they say maybe ask somebody to jump onto the project for the day or temporarily to help you. Then they can just jump in and and do whatever. You know, but once it has more than 2 or 3 people, like the random editing, the free access mode, not recommended. It's going to be chaotic. So, you know, so for school projects, yeah, unless in this case you have a big group of about 4 to 7 people, so you're going to need to do work sets. But if you were working on a smaller project where it's like 3 of you or 2 of you, you don't have to set up work sets for like 2 or 3 of you. Because chances are you won't be clicking on the same object. You know what I mean? But 7 of you, you're going to be chaotic and you're going to be clicking on the same object and it's going to be just madness. Right.
Sir, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there any point in time where I can switch modes from assigned to unassigned? What if somebody is unable to finish their task and someone else has to come in to finish it?
That's a good question. So to answer your question, yes, it is possible. And I believe we're going to show something like it coming up in a bit. So yes, you can switch tasks. Now, when we are using the assigned work method, it is a good idea to kind of set up the rules of how you want to split, for example, a model. Now, as a rule of thumb, usually for a average model, you want to split the model into things that make sense. So for example, you could have persons that are doing the shell of the model that has to do with windows, opening doors. You could have persons that's dealing with roofs, also deal with slabs and maybe stairs and anything that has to do with vertical circulation. You could have persons that dealing with the structure. So for example, they would deal with maybe floorboards and roof joists and columns and all these kinds of things. So it could also be that the model could be divided by different areas. So it could be that maybe the central element is worked on by one user, or it could be the model is divided by floors and maybe the ground floor is worked on by user 1 and the first floor is worked on by user 2 and so forth. So there are many ways that you can kind of divide this model using this method. Okay, so now that we have our OneDrive folder set up and our virtual drive set up and synchronized with the same drive letters, now we're going to take a look on the project that we want to complete collaboratively. So this is the generator shed project, and it is a fairly simple project where we can see we have a plan here with a simple shed drawing. We also have a roof plan, and we have a couple of elevations, and we have a section here that shows a little bit of detail there, and we also have these as CAD drawings. Now our objective is that we want to complete this project collaboratively, and the idea is that if we work together with multiple users and divide the work amongst ourselves, then we'll be able to do this quickly. Now the first thing we want to do is to make this file available to all users, because this is essentially our drawing that we're going to be following. So in order to do that, I am going to create a folder. So if I go to my OneDrive folder here, and I go to, here we go, and I say open folder here, we will see that we have the OneDrive folder open. Now we no longer need to be using OneDrive, because we now, if we look in our PC here, we now realize that we have a new drive that is called Drive Q, and this Drive Q is synchronized through OneDrive. So from now on, I'm going to be using Drive Q whenever I'm working on this project. So I'm going to go to Drive Q, and of course we see where we had the software folder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder here, and on this new folder, and what I'm going to do is to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call that folder maybe plans, and in this folder I'm going to place the drawings. Now keep in mind that this folder is linked to all the other computers, so once I place a file in here, both my other users from the laptop and desktop will go to their respective drive Q, and they will also see this file appear here, which is great. Now any other file I place there will also be of use. So for example, I can also paste the DWG file here as well. So, and any other file that I want my entire team to have. Now that this is all done, what I need to do is to go ahead and open Revit and start to set up my Revit users. Now on all three computers, I am going to need to have Revit open. And before we actually get going, the first thing that you should acknowledge with the Revit users is actually your Revit username, because that's going to be important to know who is manipulating the drawing. Now by default, the Revit username will be issued to your Revit application based on your Windows login information. So for example, if I go here to to file, so I'll go to my little home menu at the top. In case you go to this page here, I'll go to my little menu here, and I go to file, and then I'll go to options here, and then what you'll notice is that under username, I can see that this user is called desktop PC. Now I can do the same thing on the laptop user. I'll go to options, and I'll say this user here is called laptop PC. Now on the other hand, when I go to the Apple user here, I will see that this user is actually grayed out. And for those of you who are using a online license, so in this case I'm using a educational license, signed up with Autodesk, then you are really unable to change your username because it's just issued by Autodesk. So in this case, this is my username, whereas these other two users are not signed in to Autodesk, so you can freely get to rename your Revit user anytime you want. Now an important point is it's not advisable to rename this in the middle of a project, because your access to the project. Yes. Yeah, man, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I was asking.
Uh-oh. It sounds like your connection is going.
I think my wife.
Yeah, what? Go again. You want to type it? Type it and let me see if I can answer you. All right. In the meantime, we'll continue. is based on your Revit username. So if you change your username in the middle of a project,
Can I still
yeah, go ahead.
can I still set up?
If you can still set up what?
Yeah, I was saying, can I still set up the BIM collaboration in Revit even if are not yet linked to the drive? Or do the team members get linked to the drive for me to set up the BIM collaboration in Revit?
Yes, you have to get set up with the drive and the virtual drive first, right? Because
I have to wait.
say that last one.
If you can repeat, please, because
Oh, you have to set up the OneDrive and the virtual drive first before.
yes, sir, I set it up, but they haven't connected to it as yet. So I want to know if I can go on to the next step in Revit, even though they haven't linked
Oh
to
yes,
the
yes,
drive.
yes. You, as long as you are accessing the drive
Yes,
through
sir.
the agreed upon drive letter, right? Can remember that whatever letter you choose, everybody has to use the same letter, right?
Yes, sir. And I put the task in Asana so that they know what letter they should use and how to access it and everything.
Right. Exactly. So as I said, as I was saying, whenever you're working as a group, it's good that you're using Asana or some kind of management app where you can track just the project information and it's not like smothered by all sorts of other forwards and stuff, right? So anything for the project, you have a hub just for the project. So yeah. Okay. All right, let's continue.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Revit might close you out of accessing the model because it's looking for that username you initially signed up with. All right, great. So once you check your username,
play back this
you are
important
pretty
part.
much ready to start. So if you change your username in the middle of a project, Revit might close you out of accessing the model because it's looking for that username you initially signed up with. All right, great. So once you check your username, you are pretty much ready to start. And in this case, the BIM coordinator is the one that will get things going. Now, currently, no Revit file exists because the BIM coordinator will need to set up the foundation for everyone else to work. So to do that, the coordinator or the leader of the team will need to go to new and create a new Revit project. Now, when they create this project, in this case, we're going to choose metric architectural template, and we're going to choose OK. And then our new project will be created. Now, when this project is created, remember it is a blank project, so we haven't started to work yet. And the idea is that we want to create this file that everyone can access remotely. So this blank file now is a normal Revit file. So this is only accessible by the user who is currently using this file. Now, the first thing that we need to do here is we need to enable collaborative work, and to do that we need to go over to collaborate, and then we are going to say collaborate. That's this icon here. Now, once we press this button, we're going to get a message that say, hey, you have to save the model before you can collaborate with others. So we're going to go to OK, save the model. And this is now going to give us, ask us, where do we want to save this model before we can collaborate. So in this case, I am going to go to the drive Q, because that is the drive that we are working from. So we're going to go to drive Q. And now we're going to continue some folder here, and the file that Revit uses to collaborate with others is called a central file. So we're going to call this central model, and in this case I am going to say version 1, because we may have other versions later on. So just for the purpose of a good naming convention, I'm going to leave this at version 1, and I'm going to call this model the generator room, and I'm going to click save. Now after you save the file, Revit is going to say, hey, how do you want to tackle this collaborative working? Do you want to work within your network, or do you want to work in the cloud and collaborate in the Autodesk BIM 360 platform? Now in our case, we are going to be collaborating within our network, but we are using a kind of hybrid with OneDrive to kind of fool Revit into thinking that it is within a network here, right? And essentially, this server that is here is really stored in our OneDrive cloud, and our OneDrive cloud is accessible to our computers via using our drive Q that we made here, and via using our drive Q that we made here. So all users access this drive Q, but it's really linking to the cloud here, and this is all going to be automated, right? So we're going to choose within our network here and choose OK. Now, one of the important parts of this is that whenever we are working with a file from here on out, we have to work through drive Q. We should not browse to our OneDrive folder whenever we're sharing or opening or manipulating any files. All manipulation of files should take place using the drive Q. Now, once that is done, work sharing is now enabled, and this this file essentially becomes that central file that we spoke about earlier, right? Now, in order to have this file work with our other teammates, if we look in work sets here, we can see that we have 2 work sets that are created for us by default. Now, work sets in Revit are kind of like layers or like slices of a cake. And what this is that the central file is encouraging us to kind of split the model into these little chunks, and to have every user access a particular chunk from the model. Now, each of these chunks here is called a work set, and the idea is that you will split the model into many work sets that you can kind of see represented here with these individual colors. So for example, this orange would be a work set, and this blue would be a work set, and this yellow would be a work set, and each of these work sets are accessible by our users, right? So for example, one user might try to access a work set that another user is currently working on, so they're going to say it's going to be locked naturally because this user is using that work set. But if a user tries to access a different work set, so for example, let's say that that user wants to access maybe this part of the model, then that would be fine. So work sets kind of help us to keep organized in our model. Now if we go back to our model here, we can see that we have two work sets that are created by default, and these work sets are currently opened and owned by desktop PC, which is of course this computer. Now the idea is that when we set up the central model, we want to divide the model into pieces, and each person can work on that model. So in this case, the model is a pretty small building, and in this case we only have 3 group members, right? We have the desktop PC user, we have the laptop PC, and we have the Apple. So if we have such a small building, we have to decide on how we are going to split this building to be done if we're going to be using the kind of assigned work method. So usually in this case, I would say maybe if we look here, we can kind of get an idea of what the building has to offer. So we do have a little bit of structure in the roof, right? And structure by default includes what happens with the walls and the foundation. So we could have a person focus on structure and detailing. So for example, they will model these elements in the roof and deal with all of the foundation elements, any columns and stuff like that. Then we could have a person work on the outer shell, so they would perhaps deal with the walls and the doors and windows and openings. Then as another user could focus on things like annotations, dimensioning, and laying out of sheets. More global things, for example, like the creation of templates to determine, visibility, graphic templates to determine how things should show when it's cut in section or elevation. And we could use that as our kind of defining factors, right? So that is how we would design our work sets. So for example, we have 2 work sets already. Shared levels and grids. So for example, whoever would manipulate the grids of the file and the levels of the file would be this user. And also we have a default work set called work set 1, which is kind of a generic name. Now in this particular case, we want to maybe rename these work sets here, and to do that, and we also want to create some new work sets. So in our case, we would only have 3 work sets because there are 3 users. So for example, we might want to click this work set and click rename, and we will call this work set the shell, representing the shell of the buildings. That would deal with the shell, openings, doors, etc. Then we would perhaps rename this other work set now to maybe deal with structure and detailing. Right. Then we would have a new work set, so we'd click new, and that person would be responsible for sheets and templates and annotations, right? Let's just put a short there for annotations, right? So, and then now we have 3 work sets. So usually you would have a coordinator, and the coordinator would tend to deal with more top level stuff, or the coordinator could be also responsible for different aspects throughout the drawing. So the choice is really up to the team members, right? So these would be the 3 work sets in this case, because we only have 3 groups. Now currently we see some different headings here, so we can see that are these editable? Yes, which means that the person who is using this computer now, the owner of this particular Revit, which is in this case desktop PC, is able to edit these work sets. That's why it says yes. There is nobody currently borrowing these work sets, and you can actually borrow stuff, because remember, it has an owner, so you can borrow it and give it back, and we'll look at that later. And are these work sets open? So yes, they are. Are they visible in all views? Yes, they are, right? So this setting here where it says open is kind of like an on-off switch, right? So is the work set on? Yes, it is on, right? You can actually switch off the work set here and so forth. Now all these options here are accessible by all users, right? Not just the coordinator PC. In this case, I'm setting this file up with this first PC here, but they are really accessible by all users. Now the first thing we need to do now is we need to allow the other users. So in this case, remember we have 2 other users. So we have the desktop user, and we also have the Apple user, and we need to assign, for example, the each of these users. In this case, it would be great to assign the laptop user to perhaps deal with the structure, and we could assign the Apple user to deal with the shell and the doors. So in order to do that, we need to relinquish the ownership of the desktop PC, because desktop PC now owns all 3, and if we own all 3, then nobody else can, create ownership. So in Revit, you don't assign ownership, but you leave the ability for somebody else to take ownership. That's kind of how the ethos of how Revit works. So in this case, I'm going to say, okay, so I don't want to own these files, so I'm going to say I only want to own the sheets and templates, because that's what we agreed to. As for the shell here, well, I would need to relinquish my ownership of these. Now to do this, I first need to choose OK here, and this is asking me, do I want to make sheets and templates the active work set? In this case, I'm going to say yes, that's fine. This doesn't really matter. It's kind of just saying, like layers, what do you want to be your active layer, right? All right, great. So I'm not ready to save this just yet, but what I need to do is that I need to relinquish my ownership of these files. So currently, when I go back into work sets here, you can see that I still own these files here. Now, before I can start to give everybody access to these files, I would need to relinquish all my access here, right? because remember, I now own everything and I need to not own everything. So therefore, I'm going to click this button here, and this now will say it's going to relinquish me of the ownership of these files. Now, it's going to say that Revit cannot relinquish the change element because the central model has not been saved. So I need to save this file now. Now here's where things gets important. You have to save this file using the drive queue, right? That's going to be super important. So in this case, we did save this drive in drive queue, which is our work folder. So I'm just going to click the save button. And this is going to say, now this is the first time that this project has been saved since work sharing is enabled. This project will therefore become the central model, right? So this is now going to convert this file into a central model. And if you remember how the central model works, it's kind of this untouchable file where you no longer access it directly, but when you try to access it, it will create a copy of itself for you to access, right? So we're going to say yes, that's fine. And also where this file is located is super important. So this file is located in drive queue, which everybody on the team has a drive queue. That's important, right? So I'm going to say yes for this here. And then what that will do is this will now save the file as a central model. Now, an interesting thing to note here, while this is being saved, if you look at the activity of your OneDrive, you will notice that all these files are being updated, which is perfectly normal. As a matter of fact, your OneDrive will probably pop up with a message saying that, hey, there is a lot of activity happening with your OneDrive, right? And you can just choose to ignore this because basically the central model is doing a lot of manipulations, and OneDrive is kind of detecting that as, hey, you know, there are files being copied and deleted faster than you can blink. So it's going to give you a warning that, hey, just be wary that there are a lot of stuff happening in your OneDrive, and that's perfectly normal based on how we're using this, right? Now, every time your OneDrive synchronizes something, you're gonna see this little icon that is right here on the OneDrive, this little refresh icon here, and chances are that will always be there. Now, while you are working collaboratively, all users will need to constantly check their OneDrive to make sure that there is nothing happening when you are trying to synchronize with your team. And we're going to look at this a little later as we proceed. All right. Now, once this file is saved as the central file, now I'm going to actually close this file here. Right. So now once this file is closed, you're going to see in your recent files that, you know, you recently had a file open, but more importantly, you're going to notice this little icon here, and this is going to be the super important icon because this means that this file is now a central model, right? Which is much different from another file. If you notice that these other files here that I have opened does not have that icon, right? Now the model is ready to be opened by all members of the team. So for example, on the laptop user, they can now go to Revit and they can go to open. And here's another important tip. When you're opening a central model, it's always best that you use the open feature in Revit rather than actually trying to double click or open the central model directly. It's best to open Revit and then open the central model. So I'm going to go here and then I'm going to look for drive queue. I'm going to go to central model and there it is. And I'm going to now try to open this model. Now, if you set up everything correctly, then you should get no error messages. And this is kind of like the proof in the pudding. Once this file opens fine, then you know that you have set up things correctly. However, if it gives you an error message, that would mean that somewhere along the line you may not have saved the central model to drive Q. Maybe you saved it to your desktop or you saved it to OneDrive, but you should always be using the drive Q, which is our virtual drive that we are currently using, right? All right. Now that I've opened the model with this user here. Yeah, question?
If you copy the central model, it actually throws things off as well.
Yes, it does. Don't copy it.
I made a mistake and did that, and
Right.
immediately it asked me to save the new copy as the central model, and then I have to do over what it is.
Right. If you want to move the central model, then any one of the local files that you have just synchronized, you can just take that wherever and turn that local file into a central file.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how you would do that. The central file, think about it this way. Every object in Revit has a file that represents that object in the central file. So there's like hundreds of tiny little files that represents every single object that is in Revit. So, you know, and then those files are referenced from whatever location they are on the computer. So if you have them in drive Q, then it's going to be looking for drive Q. So you can't just move it or else problem. All right. I'm going to open it with my other user here. So I'm going to go to Revit there, and I'm going to go to open, and I'm going to also browse to drive. I'll go to my drive Q here, and then I'll go to central model, and I'll also choose the generator room there. Now, notice that both of us has now opened this central model, and if we just reiterate back on how the central model works, we would remember that the central model, you don't really open that file. Instead, when you try to open the central file, it's just going to create a duplicate of itself, and that duplicate file is what you are actually opening, right? So this file that is currently open and these other users are really local versions of your central file. And how do we know this? Well, if you look at the name of the file up here, you will see that this file is called generator room, but then you see underscore laptop.rvt. And if you look at the other one here, you will see generator room underscore Brad Williams and this username here. So this is telling you that these files that are open are really just a mirror of the central file, and you have not really opened the central file. But clearly the users had successfully opened these files. Now, as the BIM coordinator, especially when working with a brand new project collaboratively, there are certain things you're going to want to have set up while your team works, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to actually close these files here, and when I close it, it's going to ask me, hey, do you want to save this locally or do not save the project? So I'm not going to save the project, and I'm going to relinquish all the elements that I took, that I owned. In this case, I didn't own any elements. All I did was open the file. So I'm just going to click relinquish anyway, and I'm going to close this other file as well. I'm going to say do not save and relinquish. Now, what we want to do is on the coordinator, as the BIM coordinator, there are certain things that you're going to want to have set up before everyone jumps in the file. So in this case, I'm going to now open the central model with the BIM coordinator, who is just a regular member of the group. So they use the same method that everyone else is used, where they open Revit, and you can either go to the recently opened file here if it's here, but if it's not here, I would go to open model, and I would also go to my drive Q, and in this case, so I want to make sure that I'm opening this from drive Q, because that's super important. So drive Q, central model, and I will open the generator room here, and I will choose open. Now it's going to open the very same way that it did for all the other users, meaning that it's going to create a local file of the central file, right? And if we just kind of look back at our concept here, we realize that this is what it's going to do. It's going to create a local version, and that local version is what we will interact with, right? Whether you are the BIM coordinator or another member of the team. Now this is the file that is now open, and as the BIM coordinator, one thing that you're going to definitely want to do first is to determine where is the starting point of the model, right? That's going to be super important. So another thing is that you want to also have a handle on the templates that we're going to use. So for example, should this be called level 1, or should it be called ground floor and then first floor, or ground floor and roof? Do you need a ceiling plan, and all of these things? So as a coordinator, you're going to want to try to have these things set up for your team. Now you can always set these things up as you go along, so it's not as if you have to have everything perfect, because it is a cooperative process. So you could set this up as the project goes along, but one thing that you definitely want to do is to set where does your model start, because remember, different persons are working on different things. You have somebody that's working on the structure in this case, you have somebody that's working on the shell. So the BIM model in this case will start, and I'm going to use my annotate tool here. Let's use architecture, and let's use the model line tool. And what I will do is I will just create a little demarcation here, and I'm gonna do something like that. And let's rotate this 45 degrees here. And let's also throw in a label. All right, so I'm on level 1, of course, so let's also throw in a label here, and we will call this model reference point. All right, so this is essentially just going to be the start point, and I'll put a little leader line there. By going to, I'm going to choose the model here and just choose a little leader line here, and I'm going to add the leader line right here. Right, so what I'm doing as the BIM coordinator is I'm leaving like notes that will guide the rest of the team, and You can do this not just for the model start, but just for anything that you notice on the model. And you could determine in your team that, hey, I'm going to leave notes in red. Anything in red means that it's notes for you to consider. So you could do that. So in that case, I could just have a kind of a graphic override, and I could make this note like a red note, and this would kind of be like markups. So the idea is that the other team members, if we look here, right, so we would make this maybe like red, like that, and yeah, we can do like that. So the other team members, whenever they see this here, they will know that, hey, this is notes that the BIM manager left. Now, in order for this to now synchronize with everybody else, now is where we need to synchronize to central. And the way how we do that is we go over to collaborate, and we see this button here that says sync with central. So I'm going to click this button here, and you will get this dialog box, and you can pretty much leave everything at default and just choose OK. Now, when this process is taking place, what's really happening is that now all the changes that you have made are now being sent from this local file back to the central file, right? So that's kind of how this works. So you choose when you want to say you want to send information to the central file, but keep in mind that whenever you send information to the central file and the central file detects that it's being accessed, it's going to say, hey, let me give you things that has also happened to the central file from other users. So this is a two-way street. Once you send, you will receive, right? So that is important to remember right there. So I have sent these changes, but at the same time, I've also received any changes that anybody else has done. Now that I've sent this to central, I also need to save my local version of the file. And back to our little diagram here, you will remember that there is a local file that you currently have access to, right? So you can save this local file, and you can also send changes to central and receive what central has what has been changed on central as well. So in essence, you are really saving two files. You are updating the central file, and you are also saving a local version of your file here, which is great for backups. Now keep in mind, when you are syncing to the central model, in the background, OneDrive is really recording all of these things. So for example, on the desktop computer, I can see that files are being updated. And equally, if I go to the laptop computer and even the Mac computer, you will see that, hey, these files are all being synchronized across all the machines. Now again, and you're going to hear me repeat this over and over, you're going to want to ensure that if you're doing any form of synchronizing or accessing to the central file, check OneDrive first to ensure that it is not currently working, right? Because if OneDrive is trying to synchronize files while you are trying to also synchronize files, some files will not be synced. So it's kind of just like, you know, just waiting until it's your turn. And this is maybe one of the, I would say, disadvantages of doing it this method. If you pay for the BIM 360 service subscription, you know, it doesn't matter if 10 people are pressing the sync button. It has like an AI system that will just queue you guys up and say, okay, let's take the change from user 1 first and then update with user 2. But when we're using this to a third party like OneDrive is just going to get confused if 10 people happen to be synchronizing at the same time. It's not going to know whose should come first, and then what can happen is that the central model can fall out of sync, which can be repaired easily by the click of a button, but still you want to just avoid everybody syncing at the same time. And the way how you do that is just by checking OneDrive to make sure that, you know, it's not currently like doing stuff. Even if you get the little busy icon down here, that's not really what you want to watch. You want to click on the icon and have the menu come up, and you will see if files are actively being copied, and if they are, just hold off a little bit before you open or sync. Okay, all right, so did you guys follow that? That's a critical tip. You guys there?
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's a critical tip. You don't want everybody to be syncing at the same time. This is why you don't work on sync as often as you save. All right, so there are some there is a little bit of simulation that I ran where there are multiple people working and how often you should sync. That's coming up next. It's going to be like in fast, what do you call it, a time lapse. So it's not really going to be real time. So let's open this on the other users, right? And notice you get this message here that, hey, by opening this file, you will create a local file, which we know already. Because that's how Central works. So if we choose OK, it's going to ask us, hey, do we want to override that previous file, that was local file that was created, or do we want to add a timestamp to the end of the file? So my best practice is that I always add a timestamp to the end of the file. So you will end up with these multiple files, which is kind of like timestamps of the model. Now notice on each model you also get the latest change that was done. But each person here is going to be responsible for different aspects of the model. Now, because we are responsible for different aspects of the model, we need to take ownership of those aspects. So for example, for the Apple user, I would need to go to Collaborate, Work Sets, and I see here that, wait a minute, everything here is owned by the desktop PC, so I am unable to like to take charge of creating the shell, which is what the Apple user is responsible for. So in this case, the desktop user would need to go to Work Sets and say, hey, I do not want to own these work sets. So I would say that for structure and detail, no, I don't want to own that. And for shell, I'm going to say no, I don't want to own that. But for sheets, templates, and annotations, I do want to own that. So I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to send those changes over to the other users by clicking synchronize. Now, there is a slightly quicker way to synchronize. If I click this down arrow here, notice that I get the synchronize with the little lightning, which basically just synchronizes without bringing up the options dialog box. Now, as I synchronize, again, take a look on the OneDrive of all of the users here, right? You can see that each of these OneDrives are being manipulated, and I mean that was pretty quick because the way that the collaboration in Revit works is that it doesn't really send a file, it sends instructions, which is much quicker than sending a copy of the entire file. Now basically you just want to make sure that there is nothing happening here. Sometimes you don't get the thing that says your files are synced, sometimes you will still get the waiting symbol. So what you want to make sure is that there's nothing syncing here before I now go to my collaborate and say synchronize with central, and I can also do that here. Now once I do sync with central, notice that my OneDrive is starting to do stuff here, right? And everybody's OneDrive will start to do stuff once one person synchronizes. And what we have to remember is that when we synchronize, if you remember our little diagram here, what is really happening is that once we send changes to central, automatically central is sending changes back to us. So the default is a two-way street, right? Which is good in some cases, but maybe not in others. So in this case, I made a change on the coordinators machine where I said, hey, I don't want to be responsible for all of these work sets. So for example, with the Apple user, I could say just load the latest changes from the central model, and when I choose that option, well, what is really happening is that it now becomes a one-way street where I am receiving only and I'm not sending, right? So, you know, and that of course is much quicker depending on if you want to do that. All right, great. So now that I have received those instructions, when I go to work sets, I see that, hey, I can now take ownership of the shell. So I'm going to click that and say, yes, I want to own shell. I'm going to say, okay. And do you want to make shell your active work set? I'm going to say yes. So that is like saying that anything I draw now will go on my active work set. And think of it as layers. So it's like saying that my active layer is going to be the shell layer, and I control the layer that's called shell, right? And it's going to be the same thing for my other user here, where I can now take control over the structure work set by saying editable, yes for me, and I'll say okay. And do I want to make structure my active work set? I'm going to say yes, right? Now I can also make these items my active work set by also clicking down here. So this is like saying that this is my active layer. Anything I draw, whether it's a line or a box or a wall, it's gonna be drawn on my layer, right? Now this is important because I can draw stuff on other person's layer. So for example, if my active layer is set to shell, then when I draw something, I'm going to be drawing it and sending it over to the Apple user. So that means that I'll no longer have control over whatever I draw because I've been drawing on somebody else's layer, in this case somebody else's work set. So you want to be certain that what you're drawing is on your work set and that you're not drawing on somebody else's work set, because then you'll have no control over it once you draw it, right? Everyone is responsible for their own work set, because that's the type of that is our workflow that we're using for this project. So now that we have a start point, everyone can start drawing. So for example, the Apple user who is responsible for the shell can start to draw these out. Now, of course, the Apple user can access the drive queue, and that drive queue has the plans in it. So all users have access to these very same plans, and they are now they can now start to look at the different dimensions and start to create their drawing for all these users here. Now, one point to note is that you don't have to synchronize every single time you make adjustments. At this point, you can pretty much work, every user can pretty much work like how they normally do, and occasionally you can synchronize to central where you can receive files that other users do. But as long as you're going according to whatever the rules of drawings are, in this case it's a set of drawings, existing drawings, and you know where the starting point of the model is, then you can just go ahead and draw the stuff that you are responsible for on your work set, and occasionally synchronize to receive changes from other users, which will send your changes to other users as well. So as the Apple user starts to draw, they may realize that, oh, we need walls that are 150 millimeters, and the default set in Revit does not have these 150 millimeter walls, so we're going to have to create some like a new wall type. All right, so we're going to call this 150. Now this is not going to be available to the other users as yet because they have not synchronized, and this user hasn't synchronized either, but that doesn't really matter. As we said, you don't have to synchronize every single time. That's the idea. You're supposed to just continue like drawing, and that's the idea of how this process works. Now, most of the times when we're drawing in Revit, we're going to use the revise it approach. So we normally draw and then we revise what we draw. Now, as you start to build out your model, in this case, this user here is responsible for the walls, in addition, also responsible for the height of these walls. When we switch the model to 3D, we're not ready to save it. You might realize that, well, you might now need to consider about adjusting the levels for the floors. Now, the thing about levels is that once you start to manipulate a level, then no one else in the project can manipulate that particular level, right? So it's a good idea that when you're dealing with levels, you would create reference levels that only you alone really need, and perhaps allow the person who is responsible for levels, maybe the project coordinator, or maybe if there's a particular person that's responsible for the definite levels, to manipulate the actual level that is linked to the plans, right? So in this case, the height of the generator room, that level to the belt beam is going to be 2,600 from the base. So what I would do in this case is I would just copy this level here, and I could call this under belt, right? And then this would be 2,000 600 there. And notice that this is black, so that means that this is actually this level does not have a corresponding plan, because the plans that you see here are linked to the levels that are in blue. The levels that are in black are simply just reference levels, right? Okay, so we're going to create this level. So this is the height to underneath the belt beam, and then there is also a height to the top of the belt beam here. And that is 2,850. So what I'll do is create another one here, and I'll call this top belt. That is here. Now if these are getting in the way, what you can do is just change the scale of the model for the purpose of drawing, of course, right? Now in this case, the person who is responsible for the structure will just concentrate on their segment of the model. Now they're going to ensure that they are on the correct work set. So for example, if I look on current work sets here, we want to make sure that we are on structure and detail, because that is the responsibility here. And remember that if you draw on somebody else's work set, then those items will be given to that person. So with that said, let us now start drawing the structure and details of this model. Now while we are drawing this, we have to keep in mind that there are other persons working on the model, so we should try as much as possible to stay clear of elements that are not under our responsibility. So for example, we are not dealing with the walls, but we are dealing with the foundations, for example. So we would not be placing any walls above ground, right? Now we could synchronize to central, but the person who is currently working on the walls may not have synced their files yet. So we just have to continue to work within our bounds of what is responsible for us. And in this case, we're going to start with the foundation. Now, at the beginning of the project, while the other members of the group are working, the coordinator would be responsible for giving general guidance to the creation of the model, in addition to working on templates, in some cases creating levels, and just creating more top level stuff. So for example, in this current file that the coordinator is working in, this person is responsible for sheets, templates, and annotations. Now, they haven't synchronized to Central as yet to receive some of these changes that were done, but in the interim, they can start to set up things like the structure of the project, the sheets, and especially the view templates. So for example, they might go ahead and, let's say, delete the ceiling plans because there is no ceiling plans for this particular project, so they don't need to have that necessarily. They could maybe rename some of the floor plan levels here. So maybe we could call this ground floor. And we choose to rename that. And in terms of the roof level here, now notice that we cannot edit the label ground floor, and that is because another user has actually started to manipulate that level already. So Revit recognizes that and say, hey, somebody else is actually using this. Now this is an important point because all right, so as we're winding down to the end, what you guys are seeing now is 3 persons working simultaneously on the same file. All right, you guys with me?
Yes, sir.
All right, now, well, the idea is that I want to let this video be available to you after we finish this. So that you guys can use it in doing your final model. But anyway, notice that there are multiple persons working at the same time. And this is what is going to be happening when you guys are creating your model. And notice that even in this demonstration, sometimes we're clicking on stuff and other persons have those things in use. So you have to move on and edit something else until they synchronize, right? So this is the kind of activity that you would expect if you would have those 3 persons showing the screens of those 3 persons, right? And this is assuming that they're working at the same time. I mean, it could be that one of you decide to get up at 3 a.m. and work, and somebody else decide to work in the middle of the day. The important thing is that you eventually synchronize, and you don't synchronize every minute, but you synchronize when you're about to take a break. All right. Levels and sheets cannot be locked to one user. Levels and sheet work with a first come, first serve basis. So the first person to have started to edit the level drawing is going to be the first person to have rights to it. Now, while the other members are working, The sheets, for example, could now commence their design process, because we don't need to have the actual drawings in order to start creating the sheets, right? So we could actually start to lay out these sheets, for example. So we could have a sheet here, and this sheet that's here, we might call this plan. Maybe roof and floor plans. And then we could also create a new another new sheet here, and we could perhaps call this one elevations, right? So we could actually start to create most of the framework around the project. So we could call this elevations. And sections. And maybe we could even start to rename some of these views. Well, some of these might be locked because other persons are currently editing these views. We could also be going into manage, and we could start to set up things like the location of the project and the project information. That's here. So for example, the organization name, the building name, the author, and these are all things related to the project. Now the other thing we can do is also add like particular notes and items that persons might want to look out for. So there could be, for example, a new sheet. So for example, under view, we could create a plan view and create a actual drafting view. Here we go. And we could call this drafting view maybe notes. So for example, any important notes. So for example, for this drafting view that we call notes, we could insert, for example, a CAD drawing of maybe important guiding relating information that we could use. So in this case, let's say that for this generator project, I wanted to load the CAD drawings. So I go here to plans, and here I would load these CAD drawings here. So I could put pictures or just any useful information that I believe the team would need in this drafting notes right here, right? And all of this is happening all simultaneously in the same project. So here are those drafting notes here. Now, as we continue to work on this project, we may notice that at some point we do need to synchronize with each other. As you can see that everyone here kind of has only a part of the full story. Now this is where things get interesting, because the idea is that if we are going to synchronize, we also need to save local copies as well as synchronize copies to central. Now this would be super important, and this as mentioned before you synchronize, you want to check that somebody else isn't synchronizing simultaneously with you. Not that it may not work, but it's just a likelihood that things will fall out of whack. So for example, there is usually a synchronization plan that will be determined by the coordinator. So for example, the coordinator might call to say, hey, Apple user, have you synchronized today? Can you please synchronize, right? Or it could be a plan where before anyone synchronizes, they confirm with, let's say as a group message that, hey, I'm about to synchronize now. In any case, if for example, the project coordinator starts to synchronize, so I'll click sync to central here. Now notice on the other computers what happens with OneDrive. You will start to see the OneDrive begin to update, right? And there we go. And the idea is when you go to synchronize, you want to check the OneDrive first to make sure that there is nobody else updating. So for example, if I should bring up the OneDrive here for the desktop PC, and let's say that now the laptop is trying to synchronize. So when you click synchronize there, you would notice that OneDrive starts to pop up and you will see things starting to happen. And then eventually you will see things start to happen on the other computers. So this is that thing that's happening that you want to look for. You want to ensure that OneDrive is not doing something while you are synchronizing, right? And you can kind of see where one file updates and then the others follow thereafter, right? And this is only for a fraction of a second, so the likelihood of two persons clicking synchronize at the same time is pretty low. In addition to that, usually you check the OneNote before you sync. So the last person is about to sync. Yeah, you guys realize I keep calling it OneNote, but it's really OneDrive. I guess you figured that by now. No, so they would click on the OneNote icon, and they don't normally, even though this says download in one file, you can basically ignore that. What you want to make sure is that it's not downloading more than one file, right? So the reason why, for example, OneDrive is saying downloading file is because you currently have the file open, so OneDrive cannot update this file, the files that are linked to this open file. So it's kind of just holding in place. So that's perfectly fine. But if this says that more than one file are currently being updated, then you don't definitely do not want to click sync to central, right? So this is perfectly fine. And I will now click sync to central and watch again as all the other computers start to grab those changes as well, right? So you can see, and then you will see the other sessions start to grab those files, and all of that is happening in the background only for a fraction of a second, so you don't need to worry necessarily that things will clash. Now if you notice on the desktop computer, you sometimes will get a message that said there is a sync issue, and usually you don't have to worry about this. So usually this is there because some of the files are currently open on other computers, so OneDrive can't access those files. Now as long as the central model doesn't say that the central file is out of sync, then you will be fine. You can pretty much ignore what OneNote is doing, because OneNote is not necessarily made to synchronize Revit files, so it's detecting some things as errors that aren't really errors, right? So that's really the only purpose why you want to watch OneDrive, just to make sure that there's nothing happening here when you are syncing. Now notice when we synced, we kind of went in the order of we synced this file, this user first, and then we sync this user second, and then we sync this user third. So that would mean the first user would not have received the third information, not unless they synced again after 2 and after user 3 had synchronized, right? So you're going to end up in this situation where everyone eventually needs to sync, and everyone will eventually get the updated files, but you don't need to sync every second, because then you're going to increase the chances of clashing while somebody else is syncing, right? So for example, with these other users, you could see that, for example, the foundation user that was working on the structure, they pretty much completed the structure before they decided to sync. And of course, if you notice that the last user to sync, which is this user here, received everything, because this person synced first, then this person synced second, and this person synced third. So everything here went to here, and everything here went to here. So so the person who synced last received both 1 and 2, right? So so everybody needs to eventually synchronize. Now for example, if me being the desktop user realize that I didn't get anything really, because if I look on my level 1, you can see, or in my 3D view, you will see that, well, I didn't get any models because I was the first to sync, and the Apple user had synced last, so I would need to sync again. So this is why it's important that you just sync on occasion, because you never know when somebody else will update something, right? Now in this case, I could click the sync icon here, but I know that, remember, sync is when you send updates and receive updates. Now I know that I didn't do any updates, so there's no need for me to send updates. So instead of clicking the sync button here, what I would do is go to collaborate and just choose the reload the latest. So this is like me downloading everything that other people did, but I am not uploading whatever I did, because I didn't do anything to upload. So there's no sense in wasting time uploading no changes. So if you know that you did not make any changes to the model, then it makes sense that you just click download instead of synchronize, right? So and usually you do that maybe because somebody did an update, and maybe you downloaded before the person updated it, so you need to re-download, or you synced before the person updated, so you can just go and download. Now the good thing about downloading is that it doesn't notice that OneDrive is not really doing anything, and that's because downloading means that you are just receiving files, so your model will be updated, right? You are not sending files. So we're going to click download for this user here. That is the laptop user, and you will see that that user has now received those files. They didn't send any file because they didn't have any updates. Now, as you can see, all three models are pretty much on the same page, and this is where we can start to see what other users have been doing. So for example, both users had created levels, right, for their own purposes. So for example, if on this user here I go to a elevation view, then you will notice that for that user, they will notice that, hey, there have been a lot of levels that are created from other users. Now these are just really kind of reference levels, because they are not creating a plan for every single level, which is fine. So if there's a particular level that is not needed, then a user can hide this level if they so wish, right? Now, when things are like this, you can start to see other things. So for example, we could look at this foundation here, and we could say, hey, the person who is doing the foundation, they didn't cut the door, the opening for this door element right here. Now this is interesting, because when I click on this element, you can see that this element actually belongs to the person. We can see that this element here actually belongs to the person who is working on the shells and the doors, and of course this person here is the person working on the shells and the doors. So that would mean that if I realize that, oh wait, there is an error here, and I want to fix that error, if I try to, for example, let's say that you get a opening, so let me choose a wall opening, and I want to insert a opening into this wall here, I'm going to get an error message that say, hey, I can't edit this because it is owned by the person that is dealing with the walls, right? And that's perfectly fine, because perhaps the person who is dealing with the walls, they are not ready to cut this yet. Maybe they're doing something else. So when you take ownership of a work set, it really prevents other users from editing that work set, and that might be, well, either a good thing or a bad thing. So usually there is other modes of communication, so maybe you could send this person a message, or if you're working in a project management environment, you could also send a update to say, hey, you have walls intersecting your doors, right? Now this is where the coordinator would set the rules of engagement. The idea is that if there is an error, for example this one where the walls are intersecting the door, then what it should mean is that this user is currently fixing that problem. Now the problem will arise if the user has not fixed this problem and they are done working for the day, but then they have left the project with this particular problem. So this is why it is a good practice that when you are finished working for the day, you should now release that work set, right? You shouldn't leave it locked necessarily while you are not in the project, right? It's kind of like leaving the office and locking the doors so no one else can go into the office, right? So if I am finished working for the day, for the user that is responsible for the walls, so this user has finished working for the day, then they would now go to collaborate, and they would go to work sets, and they would say, hey, shell opening and doors, no, I don't want that to be editable. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this file and I'm going to go home for the day. Now, before I close, I need to synchronize, but even if I don't synchronize, when I try to close the file, it's going to say, hey, you have made changes, you have not saved. So you can say, hey, okay, I want to save locally, and then it will save that there. Now what I've done here is that I've said that I no longer want to edit that file, but this user that is here now, if they're trying to fix this issue, and they go, let's say they want to insert like a wall opening or something, when they click here to put the wall opening like that, now they can edit this element, because this element is no longer owned by the other person, right? So because that person has released that file and went home. So now I can edit these walls. You can see here that this is on the shell work set, but I'm still able to edit it, because if I go into the collaborate and go to work sets here, you will see that the shell work set is not owned by anybody, because that person has closed off and they have said they have released their ownership of that work set. So anything that they created on that work set is up for grabs from any other team member, which, as I say, may be a good thing or bad thing. In this case, it's a good thing, because the team member can say, oh, hey, you didn't put a opening in this wall, so I'm just going to, even though I'm not responsible for the walls, I'm still going to add a opening there in these walls here. There we go. And the idea is, when this person gets back and opens the model, they're going to realize that, hey, there have been some changes, right? So let's say that this person had, come over to this work set and, just made that adjustment for that person there. And now this person has done working for the day. So if they try to close the project, it's going to say, hey, you need to synchronize with Central, because you just made some edits to somebody else's work set, and you did some other changes and you haven't saved yet, and you also need to save a local copy. So I'm going to say, okay, then I'm going to sync with Central, and I'm going to say okay. Now, while that's happening, the other user is that is responsible for the structure is perhaps they're still working just fine, and they also see this error here, and maybe they decide to fix it or maybe not. They may click on it and realize that, oh well, somebody else is editing this layer, but you know, they are responsible for other things in the model. So for example, you're trying to consider how they're going to do this roof, then they might realize that, hey, there's a drafting view here with notes, and if they go here they realize, oh great, the project coordinator had posted the notes for them, so now it's much easier for them to now see how they're supposed to, you know, to decide how they're going to draw this element here. So this is where you see other team members are benefiting from other members, because everyone is responsible for a different aspect on the project. So while both other parties have left the office, maybe this third person here is still continuing to work on this project, and because the other person had placed this drawing here, they could you know, maybe their life is a little bit easier, because for example, they can now decide to maybe trace some of the elements here and copy them over, or they can you know, see all of these measurements right in the same window as in the same drawing that they're trying to create this drawing. So for example here, we know that this slopes going this way, so we need to take this elevation here, and this elevation here is where the thing where it will slope. So we could create some model lines. So let us set our work plane, and we're going to pick a plane. So we're going to use this surface here. So this is our work plane, and with this work plane here, essentially, let's see if we can kind of put this side by side. Let's put this back down here. And while we're editing this, the other team members comes back to the team and continues working on the model, while we will continue working here on this model. And because another team member has essentially helped to kind of lay the foundation for creating this, it makes life just way more easier for this other team member that is beginning to draw this. So in this case, I'm gonna go with a component, and we're gonna use a model in place, and we're probably gonna make that be structural framing as the category, and we're probably going to call this roof frame. And we're going to make that an extrusion, and we're going to just start to draw this out based on these measurements here. So we can hide the work plane so we can see things a little better. And there are some parts of the model that you will need other people to draw before you can actually do your drawing. So in this case, some of these drawings we may have needed and some we may have not needed. Now we can see that all three users has made updates to the file, and it's about that time when we would need to now synchronize with Central again. So as usual, each person would check their OneDrive to make sure that nobody else is currently synchronizing before they hit that sync button, right? So so notice that on the laptop PC it says 10 files are processing, but we know to ignore that. What we're watching is there anything happening with these files here, and we can see that none of these files have been updated. So whoever wants to update first can go ahead and make those updates. So we just need to remember that every time we want to synchronize with Central, we need to check to make sure that those files are not being updated before we click the sync button. So as soon as we synchronize with one user, we can see that OneDrive is doing its thing, and we can see the other two users OneDrive also get updated as well, right? Now we can go ahead and synchronize the other users, so we can check to see that okay, nothing is happening with any syncing. So I feel like I'm safe to sync now, and that user will now hit the sync button. Now also to remember that when we hit the sync button, it is sending changes, but it is also receiving them as well, and it will only receive the changes based on who last synchronized to the central file. So we're going to go ahead and synchronize with the last person there now. And we can see that OneDrive, it's doing its thing in terms of updating those files. Now we can also see that some users are working on the more environmental adjustments, such as laying out sheets and putting on annotations. But in doing so, we realize that some files are being in use that we want to use. So it is inevitable, as we are all everyone here is working on the same project, so it is likely that we'll come across situations, especially that has to do with views and levels, where one user might have tweaked a level or a view, and once they do that, for the other users it is going to basically lock the levels or views until that user that edited them first updated those views. Now, while the other drawings are being developed, the person that is responsible for the sheets can start to create visibility graphics templates to help to visualize the sheets better, right? So for example, for this section view here, and for the wall sections that's displayed here, we can start to create a view template, and we can see the view template that is used here, which is pretty much the default one. So we could, for example, create our own template. So for a way that we can do that is to let's say for walls that are cut, we could go to override graphics, but by category, and what this does was it will set all walls to a particular visual style. So for example, we can say that we want all walls that are cut for the pattern to be horizontal lines, and we can preview that, and that's what that would look like. We can also say that the cut lines could be thicker, so maybe like 6. That's what that would look like. Maybe like 5 would do. There we go. Right, so we can already kind of see that coming to play here. We could also modify floor slabs as well. So we could say, for example, this, which is a hardcore, we could edit the type of material here, and we could say that in the structure for the hardcore, that the material that we can click on here could be we can perhaps choose one of these. This looks like that. This kind of looks like that. We could even create our own material. We could duplicate this material and call this hardcore. And we could change this from that to perhaps something else. Maybe the crosshatch is good. And there we go. And we can apply that there. So now we can start to see that coming through, and we could go ahead and start to put in all the necessary adjustments to these elements here. We know that the laths are coming and the roof, so we could we don't have it to select here as yet to set our overrides, but we could go to our visibility graphics here in anticipation for when those roof members will be coming on board, when we synchronized to central, and we could say that all structural we could say that all structural framing cut lines, we could override that and say that these cut lines should be 5, and we could override the pattern and say that this pattern should be represented as a maybe like a kind of a wood pattern like that. Then we could also modify the roofs as well. So we could look for roof, and we could say that the cut pattern for roofs should be a solid fill of color black. And these are just visibility graphics that we are setting in anticipation that those members will come on board. So I'm not seeing these members now, but I'm setting the visibility graphics for it. And then what we can do is, in order to save these settings so it can be used for another section without having to set them again, we will now go to view template and say create template from current view, and we'll call this our maybe arch section, and in this view template it will automatically save all the visibility overrides, but we can say that, you know, we don't want to override the shadows and all of this visualization stuff, because we want that to be able to change on the fly. But what we will override is just the visibility graphics, primarily just the visibility graphics there. So these are what this view template will override, and we're going to choose OK. And now this is a template, so if we cut another section, we can simply just apply this view template to another section, which is great, so we don't have to set all of these settings again. Now, as we start to finalize our project, we are going to be wanting to sync in a direction where the group member that's responsible for finishing work, so for example things like the sheets and the annotations, we want to ensure that they are being fed all of the latest changes. So what you will find is those persons will be synchronizing a lot more often as you get to the end of the project, because for example they would have identified things that perhaps needed to be adjusted in the overall project, and when it comes to finalizing smaller details such as certain lines for drawings might be missing, certain dimensions, there might be overlaps. So for example, where things intersect, let's say for example that somebody draws a grid line and another person draws an element that doesn't align with the grid line. So in everything there needs to be a priority factor. So for example, the person who is drawing the grid lines, everybody has to conform to the grid lines. The grid lines do not conform to an element or a drawing. So as it relates to the sheet, and the finalization of the drawings, that person would now begin to check through those drawings. They would continuously seek to synchronize with the central model, and essentially they're like a quality control. So they might find things that are not, let's say, represented correctly, and they themselves might take on the task to fix those issues, or they could send it back and say, hey, the person who is responsible for walls, there is something with the walls that's not quite right, you need to fix that issue, right? So it may depend. So if we look on those drawings now, we can kind of see how everything is being filled out on the sheet. So for example, as we look into these drawings and we kind of analyze these, and we see all the laths and the rafters and everything coming through based on the visibility graphics template that we had set, which is great. And then we notice other things. For example, now we are able to edit these level lines that are here, because everybody has now synchronized. So usually when it gets down to the last little bit of things to adjust, it's a good idea to have that one quality control person just kind of go through and check to see what things are not represented correctly and try to fix those issues ASAP, right? And even as we see here, we can see where, for example, things like the borders weren't set, but maybe that was previously closed because somebody else was editing it. So as it gets to near the end of the project, you want to have less persons checking out the model or making their adjustments, and we want to have just the persons who are finalizing the model now begin to kind of tidy up most of these things. Like you can see that some of these still can't be edited because another person has it in use. All right, that was super long. Is anyone alive out there?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I wanted this marathon video to kind of go through so that I can have this recording for you guys to use when you're doing the project. All right. Because pretty much after today, you guys are going to be on your own in terms of producing your project. And then you'll have the different persons that's responsible for the different aspects. All right. So with that said, I'm going to upload this file as soon as possible so that we can get so that you guys can have this as your reference. All right.
All right, sir. So where are you uploading it to? The YouTube or on the website?
Well, it's on the website. It's just hosted by YouTube. So you know we're
Where
on the
on the
website.
website? No, sir, because I've been trying to get access to the recordings, and I don't know if I'm looking. Yeah.
All right. Well, where you're going to go is when you go to the website, remember the website is CSA utechjamaica.org. That is really the website, and then the module website is like a page underneath that. So if you're going to the website directly to the module website, you need to come out of the module page and go back to the student page where you see the recording buttons up here. Are you seeing it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right.
I
So
was
that is
looking
where
at the module part of the
right.
website. That is well.
So you need to click home to come out of that part, and then you go to class recordings, and that is where you'll find all of them. All right.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
Right.
Thanks.
No problem. All right. So I will see you guys on Wednesday when will be the final presentation for assignment 1. For those who didn't get a chance to present. For those who did present, they need to hand in their final mimic. All right.
Okay, sir.
All right. Cool. Take care.
Have a good one.
All right, cool.